Chris, you mentioned that there's 400 employees at peak season. You've got 100 full-time employees, so what's the other 300?
Well, it's a mix, and it depends on the time of the year. So in the fall is when we are at our maximum employment. A lot of that employment, that seasonal employment, tends to be high school kids, retired individuals. These are people that work on our pick-your-own farms, driving the wagons for the public out to the field, working concession stands, doing things like that. This time of the year, in the summer, which is another kind of sub-peak of our employment season, we do have a lot of Hispanic labor on the payroll as well, and they do a lot of our harvesting in the peach orchards and packing the fruit in our packing shed.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that. In fact, I want to talk quite a bit more about the migrant labor force you have here, since that's such an important topic in the United States right now. Where do they come from? How do they end up here?
We really have focused primarily on Mexicans. We've got a very good, stable management force from Mexico. We've got a couple individuals who are year-round employees for us, and specifically Martin is probably the top manager that we have. He was a Mexican who's now an American citizen, and he's been with us for 18 years. But he has really been a great resource for us in terms of recruiting people he knows and making sure that we have high-quality individuals working for us that don't cause trouble and are good workers, and also in the communication end of things, so that we have good bilingual communication between us and the team doing the work. He's been a great resource for us.
What's his last name?
Mauricio, M-A-U-R-I-C-I-O.
And is there one area of Mexico in particular that he finds the workers?
Primarily from Michoacan, which is a state in Mexico, and Chernoztico is the city in which Martin came from, and we've maintained a good relationship with that particular area and getting recruits up from Chernoztico. Now things are changing a little bit in the last few years as H-2A program. These are agricultural visas that you can get for seasonal workers out of foreign countries. And as we've adopted more of the H-2A program into our workforce, we're broadening that reach in Mexico. So not all of the people are coming from Chernoztico anymore. It's more border communities and so forth. And we rely on firms that go and source H-2A workers in Mexico for the agricultural industry.
Is that why it's been changing in terms of the locations they're coming from?
Yeah, because we're working with other organizations that kind of specialize in H-2A employees, and they have actual offices down in Mexico with recruiters, and they're basically, put out help wanted ads in Mexico and say, if you're looking for jobs, there's employers in the United States that are looking for workers, and they come in and they pre-screen employees, from Mexico, and say, okay, we've found 10 or 20 guys that we, think are highly qualified to do what you want to do. Then they go through immigration at the consulate in Monterrey, Mexico, and come up to Belleville on a bus.
Why Mexicans?
Well, logistically, they're close. They don't stay year-round, so they can get back home pretty easily. There's a large population, and it's kind of what we're familiar with. We have a lot of long-term Mexican employees that work in our organization, and so we've developed good relationships with them and understand their culture and how things work in their families, and so it just seems to be a system that has evolved in our business and effective evolution for us.
And why migrant force rather than a native workforce?
That's tough. Things are changing dramatically in our country, and if you were to take a look back 50 years ago, you wouldn't see Mexicans working for us. It'd be a totally different style of workforce. And as the U.S. population has become basically fully employed, and more focused on having a home and a secure place where they live. That workforce that was Americans looking for harvest jobs and moving around the country as the crops moved around the country has disappeared. There's not Americans that do that anymore, and I think that's good. That's great that we are as prosperous as we are as a nation. Unfortunately for fruit growers, you are dependent upon hand labor to do the work. There's not mechanical devices out there to harvest peaches or apples or strawberries. They're all harvested by hand, and until we can find a mechanical way to harvest our crops, we are going to be dependent upon a seasonal workforce to come in and do that for us.
What's, if you're willing to talk about this, the kind of pay and benefits that the migrant workforce would get?
The migrant workforce, the minimum wage basically starts out at $10 an hour. So it's not a low-paying wage relative to minimum wage nationally. What the state minimum wage today is $7.75, I believe, and we're starting our Hispanic workers out at $10 an hour, and they earn piecework bonuses on top of that. So some of these guys are making $13, $14 an hour, plus we provide them with free housing, and they get provided with transportation to and from Mexico and to and from work every day.
Are there any meals that are provided?
No meals. They provide their own meals, but they're provided transportation to and from their grocery store or wherever they needed to go. We pay for all of that. So, relatively speaking, they have very little expense while they're here in the States. So they end up doing quite well when they go home.
Tell us a little bit more about the housing that you provide.
It's really a mix of different things. We've got a labor camp, which is a state-regulated labor camp, and I'd say of the living arrangements we have, it's probably the least desirable. Even though it is state-regulated, it's pretty dormitory-like and pretty rigid and structured and not very spacious. We go from that to some old farmhouses that have been renovated for use for these guys, and it kind of depends on the group. There's some guys who are year-round employees and have their families here. Well, they have a house. They've got their own home, and some of those homes are provided for. We provide housing for some of them completely as part of their pay compensation. It's all negotiated as part of any type of employment negotiation would go. But it ranges from the labor camp to farmhouses. I think we have one mobile home trailer, some old brick buildings. Actually, they're not old. It's a new brick building that has been converted into some rooms and so forth. So it's really a mix of different styles of living facilities.
Do some of them that come from the travel back and forth each year, do they come as families or do they come as individuals?
Most of them come as individuals. Now, the H-2A, if we go back and how things were maybe before H-2A visas were part of the system, there might have been more families coming in. Today, border security is much more stringent. Trying to get across the border with your family is very, very risky. Most of those guys coming in are illegal aliens. They're sneaking into the U.S. For years, that was the way the system worked. The border, there were laws, but the border was open, basically. And people would cross in, and they'd come into the United States, and they would, there's underground networks for them to get false Social Security cards and false green cards, and they would present you these documents, and they look real, and you take down their information, and they go to work for you, and then at the end of the year you get these things back from the IRS saying these are mismatches, these Social Security numbers don't match our files, you've got a mistake here. Well, by that time that person's gone, and back in Mexico or wherever. Well, that is kind of stopped now, or it is stopping, because the border's gotten a lot tighter after 9/11. Border security has become a lot higher priority.
How long has this H-2A aspect of the immigration law been in effect, though?
I think H-2A visas started back in the 90s, but weren't really widely implemented. But they're becoming, in the last 3 years, has really become a big deal because the other way of doing business is becoming impossible because the border security is tightening up.
Is that the function that Martin plays then? He's the one who's ensuring that these are legal temporary immigrants on work visas, on H-2A visas?
I think, no, Martin's, you can't, it's a double-edged sword because if somebody presents you with a document, you can't question it. So if an employee brings you a Social Security card or a green card, you can't question its authenticity. If it looks like it's supposed to look, you have to accept it because then you can be sued for discrimination. So it's a double-edged sword for the employer, which way to go. So what we have done as an employer is said, while there are a lot of Mexicans coming to us with Social Security cards and green cards, we're opting to go with H-2A visa program just to make sure that we know that everyone that we bring in to work for us is legally documented and legally here and that there's no question about it.
How long have you been involved with the H-2A program?
We've really been started on it about 3 years ago. The St. Louis area has got a pretty large Hispanic population, so there's a lot of Hispanic base here that wants to work, and it's hard to decide, should you be employing these people because they're coming in and they're showing you documentation and it looks legitimate and they're good workers, or could it be false? You don't know until the end of the year when you get the information back.
The government's not there to help you determine whether these documents are false or accurate?
I think there might be a website, I'm not sure, that you can go to and type in a Social Security number, and I don't. That would seem like it'd be rare to be able to go to a website, but they're not really. This is the whole problem with comprehensive immigration reform.
Well, that's the next question. Give me your opinion about the current state of affairs as far as immigration is concerned.
Well, it's very frustrating as an employer that's caught in the middle of this because, we're dependent upon a workforce to do these jobs, and it's not as if we're turning Americans down for these jobs. We don't get any Americans applying for the jobs. And at the same time, you have a large Hispanic community that's caught in the middle. And it's really sad because there's about 12 million Mexicans in the United States that are here illegally. And what are you going to do with these people? These people are hardworking and have done a lot to improve the lifestyles of many Americans. And our economy's become somewhat dependent upon this workforce. In a lot of ways, not just in agriculture or fruit production, but you go to the hotel, who's cleaning the rooms when you go away? Who's washing the sheets? Who's in the kitchens in the restaurants? I guarantee you in just about every kitchen that you go into of every restaurant in the United States, you're going to find Hispanic workers in the back room. They're doing a lot of the work that Americans don't want to do. And unfortunately, these people are caught in a very tough spot. And it's not really fair to them because Americans created this system that allowed them to come in and employ them. We had unsecured borders for 20 years, for hundreds of years, really. And now we're suddenly becoming very diligent about this and are somehow surprised that this happened. I mean, why are we really surprised that we're in this situation? So to just say, well, we're going to close the border and that's going to fix the problem avoids the real problem. The real problem is we have 12 million undocumented Mexicans living in the United States today. They're doing a lot of work for a lot of companies, not just agricultural companies. There's about estimated 1.5 million Mexicans, illegal Mexicans, working in agriculture today. But they're working in a lot of industries, construction, food service, hospitality. And what are we going to do with them? Because if you look back, we're all immigrants. We are all here because we wanted a better life from some other country. And so it's a little hypocritical for us to turn our back on today's immigrants and those people that are trying to get a better life for themselves. So, we talked a lot today about history and the fact that my ancestors came here in 1837 and they were welcomed into this society. And why are we now scared of welcoming another immigrant into our society that only, I think, can help make it a better place?
A lot of the dialogue today, and if people trying to figure out what the problem is, say, well, part of the problem is employers who are willing to hire illegals in the first place. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I think, yes, I do. And if employers are taking advantage of a situation, meaning that they're abusing employees because they know they're illegal aliens, I have a real problem with that. The Latino workers that we have are friends of ours, and these are people that I have the utmost respect for, and I am dependent on. So for me to think of abusing them in some way is really thinking of abusing my own business, and I have a hard time thinking in those terms. But there are people out there that take advantage of situations that present themselves, and they are abusive towards illegal aliens because they know that they don't have any legal recourse whatsoever to take on the employer, and that's dangerous. I think that's an unhealthy situation. So I agree in that sense that there is a problem. To think that farmers can pay $50,000 a year to somebody to pick fruit is unrealistic. So to think that the real problem here is that agricultural business owners just want cheap labor and want to, we should just increase the wage to $25 an hour so that these workers, so we can entice Americans to come in and work for us and earn $50,000 a year as a laborer on an agricultural farm, is just saying we're going to move all of our fruit production outside of the United States because we can't do it. People will not pay the price in our grocery stores. The food market is too competitive. If you look today, food prices have gone up 20% over the last 2 years, and there's an upheaval in our society over the cost of the grocery store bill. Imagine what it would cost if you had to pay $30 an hour to have your fruit harvested versus today having to pay $10 or $12 an hour. So you're talking about enormous increases in the cost of food, and our society is not going to stand for it. We're going to open our borders and allow the fruit to be produced in Mexico, where they can make the money there.
If you had the power to wave your wand and to change immigration law, what would you want to see?
Well, I think that there's two questions. Okay, there's the solution. How do we go forward from here? What are we going to do about the employees not that we have today, but the employees that we're going to have in 3 years from now? Because let's face it, these are bottom rung level jobs. These are not jobs that people necessarily retire on. These are jobs that people have to move themselves to a different place on the financial ladder. So you're constantly going to be getting new employees in these jobs as time goes by. And I think programs like the H-2A program are pretty effective at addressing that issue. It allows Hispanic workers a way in to come in and do these entry-level labor positions. But I think you have to make sure that you're not creating a system for indentured servants either. You don't want to just lock them in to this is all they can be in life is migrant labor. You want to allow them to have a way to improve themselves as well. So I think that's a little shortfall of the H-2A program, is it doesn't allow for them to climb a ladder within your business. They're kind of locked in as a laborer. Then the second problem is, what do you do with the 12 million people that are here? And I think there has to be an avenue for citizenship for these people. I mean, they are here with their families. A lot of these people have been here for generations. It's not just one generation, but it's been that their families moved here when they were children, and now they are adults having children in the United States. So there needs to be an avenue for these people to become legal citizens of this country. Otherwise, you want to try to throw 12 million people out of the country, and you think we already have people around this world mad at us now, try to throw 12 million people out of your country.
Well, the ones who are born here, though, are automatically American citizens.
Yes, not completely, though, because now I believe there's new laws in place that if you are the child of 2 illegal aliens, you aren't necessarily a native-born American.
Well, that's certainly very much part of the political dialogue, and we're in the heat of a political season right now. Are you generally in favor of the current trend for tightening the borders?
Well, I think it makes sense. I mean, loose borders is what got us here in the first place. But, you know, I think being an elitist nation is not healthy for any type of relationship either. So while there needs to be regulation of how people can get in and out of a country, I think that as a country we should be welcoming all people who are coming here with good intention. So, you know, that it's hard to filter out the good and the bad, but we as a country are great because people came here, not because we kept people away from here.
Okay, any final thoughts on immigration before we move to the final series of questions we've got?
I don't think so.
Okay. The family's been through a lot since 1837 and obviously done very well to retain the business, to grow the business, to find out how to thrive in a changing environment. What do you think the most significant and transformative changes in agriculture that you've seen just in your time, in your experiences?
Well, in terms of fruit production, we tend to move a little slower than what you see in other agriculture, and we've not been able to break into the genetically modified end of the industry yet. So when you're developing new varieties and new growing techniques, they tend to take more time. And what you've seen in apple production is this move towards much higher density production, which allows you to get fruit into production much more quickly and also get higher production per acre. That's probably the greatest advance that we've seen in horticulture in terms of peaches and apples over the last 20 years. But in terms of other things that we do, I mean, really, I would say the post-handling of fruit has gotten much better, and that has good and bad consequences for us. As the post-handling of fruit is advanced, people in other areas can bring better tasting fruit into our market, so we get more level playing fields. You don't have as much local advantage, and so it creates a challenge. But it also creates an advantage for us because we can, again, harvest riper fruit and produce better eating experience for our customer at the same time. And so we have to continue to adapt those new technologies as they come available to us to remain competitive.
So much of your business, it's really impressed me, deals with history, the history of your family, forming memories for these people who are coming out in the Pick Your Own operation. And we kind of touched on that a little bit when we were overlooking your orchards, your apple orchards, and seeing that urban growth coming towards you as well. So what's the emotional tug of war, if you will, that's going on in the Eckert family right now in terms of what's going to happen in the future?
Well, you know, it is a little bit of a tug of war because, you know, we have a lot of emotional value wrapped up in these farms, and emotional value doesn't always equal financial value. So they do kind of pull up at each other. It's so important in our family that we keep the communication open and that we have a clear understanding of what it is we want to do so that there's not a disconnect between one branch and another branch, and suddenly the whole thing would come apart. So we work very diligently to have outside advisors giving us advice on how to run the business, to have open shareholder meetings with all the family, can attend and discuss these issues and make sure that all voices are heard and everyone understands where we're going and why we're going, and that we, not necessarily that we all are 100% in agreement with it, but we all have an understanding of what we're doing and are behind the fact that we want to be successful as a family.
What do you think your grandfather would say, or your great-great-grandfather would say about what's going on right now?
Oh, I think about that a lot, and I've always had a lot of respect for my ancestors, so they got me to where I am, and I always look back and say, am I doing enough to make them happy? Would they be impressed with what we're doing? And it's a tough question to answer, because I think from a priority standpoint, family's one, and business is two, and you have to do both of them well. So I always try to balance that and make sure that I'm doing my best for my family here at home, and also being smart in the business end of things, because without a successful business, suddenly family becomes a lot harder to keep happy, and we have to make sure that we're balancing those together.
This piece of property we're sitting in right now, been in the family for well over 100 years, but yet you've got this urban encroachment. So what would they think about that looming decision perhaps to sell it?
Oh, well, I think about that too, and sometimes I wonder if great-great-great-grandpa would come here and shake his head like, what are you sentimental idiots thinking about? I didn't give up everything I had in Germany to let you come here and be sentimental over a piece of property. I came here to do a better thing for my life and provide a better opportunity for my children. So, there's a tug of war. You have to be true to yourself on the financial end of things, and you also can't just sell yourself out. And we're working very hard to make sure we maximize both of those and do the best for not only us, but the future legacy that we're going to leave behind in this business, and the future opportunities for our children and what they do.
Well, let's talk about children. Tell me a little bit about your children.
I have two children. I have a daughter, Ella. She's 4. And I have a son, Theo, who just turned 1. And both of our children are adopted. Ella is from China, and Theo is from South Korea.
Do you see in 20 years, 30 years, that your children and your cousins' children will be inheriting this business and running it for the family?
I hope that I can do a good enough job of making this an interesting option for them to consider. So, I think it's the viability of this business is really, for the next generation, is dependent upon how successful we can make it in our generation. So, while those things are fun to think about and probably in the long term really important, I think for the next 15 years we need to focus on doing the best we can for our generation and making this successful for the next 15 years. And we get to that point, I think if we're thriving and trying new things and even more diversified and expanding, keeping them in the business is going to be no problem. It's going to be harder to keep them out of the business. So I think those will be fun discussions to have at the time.
Any final thoughts in closing?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered a lot of ground.
We did indeed cover a lot of ground. It's been a wonderful opportunity for us to hear the story about your family, about this operation, to get a sense of how your particular business has grown and evolved and again thrived over from generation to generation. So we thank you for that opportunity.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Chris.